Do your managers really listen? And how mindfulness improves the top 5 skills in demand by employers. Companies put a lot of effort into hiring the right people. At least I hope they do. Because we're in a time right now where the jobs are actually greater than the number of people to fill them. So getting the right person in a role is more critical than ever. And on that vein, according to a recent large scale study by LinkedIn, the top 5 skills that employers are looking for are all soft skills. And all of them are improved by mindfulness, and specifically, mindful communication. Hi, my name is Kara Lescu, and I'm the founder of the Eagle Institute. So, mindfulness skills improve all 5, regardless of the personality profile and regardless of the other level of skills that people have that they bring to the role. If you have potential in your personality or even in skills that you've had in the past, being mindful greatly enhances that. On the other side, not applying mindfulness skills can really detract from someone who already has a good aptitude and or good skills for a position. So let's take a look at those top skills that LinkedIn has identified that are in most demand by businesses. So the first one is creativity. Now, creativity is definitely, our what we think of on people that have roles that maybe do a lot of this, maybe marketing, maybe business development or product development. But creativity is an important role in almost every job that we do today, whether this is a delivery person that has to solve problems on how to get something done on time, or maybe reaches an obstacle, or on a team that's working together. We also have to use creativity to solve problems and to face situations maybe we haven't in the past, and oftentimes on a really fast time frame and not perfect information. How we speak to others when we're doing this is can be very critical in the effectiveness and the speed at which we can come to desirable outcome in the situations we're facing. I'm sure we can all think back to a meeting where we've had an idea that we thought was great, or maybe it even wasn't great, but we wanted to feel like we were making a contribution, and someone unmindfully cut us down, maybe even unaware. Maybe they're under stress or under a lot of pressure. And incidentally, when someone's under stress, they can't see creative solutions very well and may very well say no to something that may otherwise be a great idea. So what does that do to the creativity of individuals? Well, as stress levels go up, one of the first skills in parts of our brain that starts to turn off is the part that is responsible for many of the aspects and skills that we need for creativity. Likewise, if we are in a situation where we have people on a group that are trying to solve problems together, and they may not even be within an organization, it may be with suppliers or clients or related businesses that are trying to accomplish a project together. If one person feels like their ideas aren't getting listened to, then they may stop contributing altogether and just let the project fail, even though they have a great idea. Also, people that are quieter or maybe need longer to think. If we listen mindfully to these people and provide a mindful experience for their ideas to be brought forward, we're much more likely to come to a really desirable solution for situations, and in a much shorter time frame than is otherwise possible. Now, persuasion. Now, people are like, what the heck? Persuasion's about talking. It's not about listening. Well, that's not in fact true. In order to persuade effectively, there's a couple aspects where effective listening and mindful listening can make a huge difference. First of all, is what do you even know to persuade the person about? How do you know what is going to be their point where they will be influenced if you don't do some mindful listening first? Second of all, think back to a time when someone tried to convince you of something or persuade you of something, and all they did was try to force their opinion on you. How likely were you to listen to that person? Probably not that much. Or if you did so, you did so unwillingly and not with, actually being persuaded. You kind of felt like bullied or pressured into doing something. But if you felt listened to first, and because you actually were listened to, you may come to the point where you actually do see the other person's point of view, and you go forward willingly, which is also better for relationships, but we also get better performance from that person, whether they're someone within your company, within your business, or at a customer or supplier or other strategic partner. So you only have the power to persuade the other person to the extent at which they value what you have to say. And one of the best ways to do that is to listen to them first. Now, collaboration. This is a big topic today because honestly, we can't solve a lot of the problems in front of us with individual skills. It takes a wide variety of experts to come together to move solutions forward, to get projects completed. And that takes an awful lot of skill. And this is a great place where mindful listening and mindful communication can save a lot of time. First of all, there's a couple things that happen on teams. Most of the time, there are people that are more aggressive and people that are more passive. First of all, by applying mindful communication and mindfulness to ourselves, we have a better sense of who we are and how we behave, both naturally and when under stress, but we also will observe and understand how others behave. So we can avoid situations where people that have a more aggressive personality are the only ones that are listened to, while people that have maybe a more passive personality or that need longer to think about things get their fair share and get to contribute. Because you know what? Those may be the people that have the exact answers that you need. And in our effort to rush, we may, in fact, be causing ourselves a lot of extra work down the line. Now, how mindful listening works with collaboration is that when we learn to listen mindfully, we're not thinking ahead to what that person might be saying or what they've said in the past. We're actually listening to what they have to say. When we do that, a couple things happen. First of all, people feel a lot more comfortable in sharing, and people tend to communicate a lot more briefly and concisely and accurately. And people are like, how can that be true? Well, you have to try it a few times until you see. People that practice mindful communication find that they get much higher contribution from people, but they also get it done a lot faster because the communication is higher trust and more concise, and there's a lot less wasted time. So those are all really important points for people that have to do a lot of collaboration in order to effectively do their work. Most teams report that when they learn to do this, they get the work done in a lot less time with a lot better outcomes and a lot less rework. And we have some case studies on that, which we'll share with you at the end. Now, adaptability. Of course, in the kind of workplace that we're working in today, but also the business environment that we're working in today, things change, and they change fast, and they change a lot. We're working in very dynamic environments. So our roles need to be able to change. Well, what happens when we're required to do a lot of adaptability, this can stimulate stress. And when stress happens, even if it's something we think we want, it elicits very specific responses in the brain that shut down a lot of our higher cognitive thinking, our creative thinking, and communication, our listening skills, a whole bunch of things, which reduces our adaptability. Now, when you mindfully communicate, you can reduce stressful situations. You can be aware of how what you're saying is going to affect people or how it is affecting people, and work to mitigate the stress reduction, which is going to help with their adaptability. So just imagine, I'm sure you've all had this situation. Someone walks into your office, they have a problem that comes up fairly regularly. It happens on a Monday morning. You've just come back from holidays. You're feeling great. Your stress level is almost zero. They bring you this problem and boom, you can solve it in 20 minutes. They bring you that same problem on a Thursday afternoon. It's almost time to go home. You have to go somewhere that evening that's really important to you. And they bring you that same problem, and you've been stressed from dealing with issues all day long. Your patience with that person goes down, but also your skills to listen effectively to that person go down substantially, and you perceive that person as a threat. If you are trained in mindful communication, you can learn to stop that for yourself and for the other person so that you can get to what needs to be done effectively in a much shorter time frame. Now, time management. So when trained in mindful communication, in mindfulness in general, communications are clearer, they're shorter, they're more to the point. They take the emotional effects of the situation into account so that people don't have suppressed emotions that are going to break out at a future point, and they don't waste time on things that aren't relevant. So our emotional responses to situations are extremely important, because unless we have a lot of emotional control and intelligence, those are going to trump any of our thinking mind. And when we are able to handle those and not get ourselves into stress, we can effectively manage our time. And on top of that, mindful communications, when practiced, save a lot of time, especially with problem solving, and especially when there's a number of different points of view that are required in order to effectively solve a problem. So, of course, potential in a person matters in terms of their personality, their skills, their history, what they bring to the table as an employee. But it's what they can actually get done in your company, in the situations that you have on your team or your business unit or wherever, that's going to determine the performance and the outcome. So how many organizations hire incredible employees and then undermine their abilities with overwhelm, with inundation that causes a lot of stress, both mental and emotional? And a lot of this can be mitigated by learning mindfulness skills, especially starting with mindful communication. So there's two things that really determine how well employees perform. The first is their mental and emotional state, and the second one is their skills. And they go in that order. Because if the mental and emotional state isn't there, it doesn't matter what the skills are. The person who's working has a much more difficult time of accessing those states. And those top 5 skills, being soft skills, all are affected to an even greater extent than maybe some harder skills that people have. But quite frankly, good communicators can learn a lot from this, even if they're already good at communicating. Communication includes written, it includes verbal, it includes body language, and all of these matter in getting our messages across. Well, this is really why it's important to develop mindfulness of ourselves, because if we're saying something to someone and our mental and emotional state doesn't agree, it's going to come across as being insincere as not trustworthy, and we're not going to get the trust and buy-in from the other people, and it really reduces our influence. So going back to our incredible hire, imagine that you have a whole team with them. And if you've been using really good hiring processes, you probably do. But if you aren't practicing mindful communication, then it's very easy for stress and overwhelm cycles to apply, just like in this case here. And this is what happens to even your best people's brains when they start to reduce functioning. And it doesn't take much for this to happen. So we had an example when we were working with somebody who is a business leader who wanted to work not just on their mindful communication skills, but on all of their mindfulness, because they felt that it was really going to enhance their skills as a leader, and they wanted to develop certain parts of their leadership. So this person had a tech company that was growing pretty quickly. And they had a strategic project that was a new area of business for them. They were working with a client and a strategic partner. And unbeknownst to them and kind of behind their back, they went into a three-way meeting with the three partners. And the person who was supposed to be a strategic partner suddenly started attacking him, and pretty much attacking him on a personal level as well as the solutions they provided. And he started to freak out a little bit. He was actually a pretty laid back person, and in the past would not have probably have stood up for himself, or would have taken a lot of it until he reached his breaking point and then really lashed out back at this other strategic partner, which is honestly pretty normal behavior. We're patient, we're patient, we're patient, and then someone crosses the line, and then we start to get defensive and start to get aggressive, and that's pretty normal behavior. But in this case, this gentleman had just learned mindful communication, and he said he'd just done it that week, actually. He said, you know what, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to see what I have and what I can learn, and I can see where he's really coming from and see if that makes a difference. And he was shocked at the outcome and of what came out of this. So he let the other person rant, and their meeting actually went overtime. He hadn't said anything. He was listening to this other person go on and on and on and on. And then finally the other person ran out of steam. And he paused for a moment, and then, just allowed what had been said to settle. And then just by listening, he came up with two incredible potential outcomes and potential paths forward where this could turn out really well for him, and certainly not turn into the loss which it looked like it was going to be. And he said, you know what, this is what I heard you say, and these are the two outcomes where I can see where this could go in a really great fashion. And the client was so impressed with this person who just sat there and listened and kept his cool and didn't, react emotionally. But the other supplier was as well. And he was absolutely shocked he was expecting to bully this guy and get rid of him and take over his business himself. But because he sat and mindfully listened, this guy started to realize what he had sounded like. And because he was listening mindfully, the stress that he had was diminishing as he spoke. And then they were able to quite rapidly come to a conclusion and potential solutions where all three parties were going to win. Because he was able to do that, he didn't lose any business on that contract, which was probably the most likely scenario at the start of this meeting, and was certainly an intention of the other strategic partner. And in fact, not only did they complete that contract and get it done on time, it turned into a strategic partnership that over the next 18 months more than doubled the size of his business. Now, imagine if the scenario, he hadn't practiced mindful listening. Imagine if instead he had gotten into a fight with this partner, gotten up and maybe stormed out or thrown his, started defending himself and gotten into a real hard three-way conflict. First of all, no more relationship with the strategic partner, and he probably would have lost the client as well. And in his own words, he said, if that had happened, the best case scenario would have been, it would have taken me 6 months to get any trust and credibility back with that client, to even do small projects with them. And it could have taken up to 18 months. So instead of, wasting 6 to 18 months trying to maybe rebuild a relationship, to maybe get some business, he was able, through mindful listening, in about 30 minutes to get to that point immediately where the trust was built and he was effective at listening, and he was able to get that situation. So in the past, this had been a real tough thing for him. He hadn't been really good at negotiating and holding his position. And he often would give things away in order just to get to the point where everybody, felt good and it got back to feeling good again. But instead of doing that, he was able to come up with a solution just by learning to be mindful and mindfully listening and allowing the other people to be heard without him getting triggered. And that's a really important part. And that did require some skills before and some practice before he got into that situation. So because he had learned those things, he felt that he knew skills how to keep himself relaxed, even when it was getting kind of tense and upsetting for him in this situation. So mindfulness and mindful communication. So he ended up with this, a celebrating situation where they're all working together. So mindfulness is about authenticity. It helps to build relationships. It helps to build trust. It requires clarity in expectations and communication. It also requires balance between the head and the heart, or between our logical mind and our emotional mind. Now, some of us are more wired for logic to be dominant, and some of us are more wired for emotions to be dominant. And why mindful communication is so effective is that we actively build both to the point that we can do both, so that we can find the balance that when we need to appeal to people emotionally, because that does work. And there are times when, being emotional can take us off track, and we need the logical mind to step in, and we are able to do that much more effectively. And it also takes into account the emotional effects of the communication, just like with my client's story that I just shared with you. The other person, for whatever reason, was feeling triggered emotionally. And until he wore himself out on that, there was no point in trying to talk to him, because he wasn't thinking clearly. He was in stress mode, part of his brain, which we're going to talk about right now. So that bad situation, and adding mindful listening, something magical happened. My client thought of a win-win solution with two alternatives that were both a win for him and for his strategic partner and for his client. So it ended up doubling his business over the next 18 months. So at this point, who looks good? The guy that listened? Who had more credibility? The guy that listened. And who ended up actually solving the problem? The guy that listened, the mindful listener. So let's just take a look at why this is the case. So, and why he was able to turn an adversarial situation where he would have lost a lot of business into one where he gained business, just as a result of mindful listening. Well, in order to understand why that happens, we need to know just a little bit about the brain and how the brain works. So this is a big simplification, because otherwise this would be a very, very long class on this. So the brain functions best for the type of work we do today when you are relaxed and alert. So if you look at this picture on here, the blue part of the brain is what we know today as the higher functioning parts of the brain. And the red part is what's known as the reptilian part of the brain, sometimes also the amygdala or the reactive part of the brain. Now they're both really important. If you're walking out in front of a car, you don't want to have to do your creative problem solving to be like, oh, I wonder if this is going to work, or maybe I should jump. No, you want the red part of the brain to go, eat, car, problem, run. And that's its job. But if you're in a meeting like you were with my client earlier, you don't want that part of the brain working, because that's the part of the brain that says, I must fight or I must run, which are our tendencies under stress. So, under stress, some of the things that we lose, because these are all functions of the blue part of the brain, logical thinking. Tests have shown that our IQ, anybody's IQ, drops about 10 points just when you're under mild to medium amounts of stress. Your creative thinking is one of the first things to go. And this is done for survival. We are narrowed down onto the things that are going to keep us alive. We also see threats instead of opportunities. So sometimes, you've heard the word crisis is both threat and opportunity. When you are under stress, we find it very difficult to find the opportunities and things until we've calmed down and relaxed. One of the other things that drops very quickly is listening accuracy. Everything goes through the lens of where is the threat. And this isn't personal. This is the way your brain and your nervous system and your nerves are designed to work. When you have mindful communication skills and mindfulness skills in general, we learn to control this response. So even though we may be experiencing it mentally and emotionally, we can calm the mind and the nervous system down to return it to a state where it can do the things that we really need. So the results are, when this happens and our brain is under stress, let's take a look at what happens with the neurons. So on the control sample here, this is somebody under normal state, and you can see how many different neurons there are. When you experience chronic stress, and this can be even low-grade chronic stress, look at the amount of neurons that you lose. And those are the connections. That's literally how smart you are. The more neurons you have connect in a particular part of your brain, the more that you are skilled and adept. So someone that's highly skilled at communicating will have more neural connections in their brain, in the areas of the brain associated with communication. Someone who's a surgeon will have more neural connections in the part of their brain related to their eyes and how they can see things, related to the parts of the brain that have memories with regard to what they're looking at, as well as to their dexterity, their control of their hands. So under stress, all of these things drop. But it also drops on other things as well, such as being able to listen, such as being able to be creative, such as remembering past experiences correctly, and being able to recall even simple data. So it's been shown that even highly trained professionals make a lot more mistakes under even mild amounts of stress than they do when they're just under relaxed situations. And of course, we've already talked about listening accuracy drops as well. So let's take a look at what the cost of this is. So take out a pen and piece of paper, and if you want one, we have a sheet that we can send to you that's a little worksheet to figure this out. So what % of your day do your employees work with others in some capacity? And take everything into account here. So if they're working on email, if they're working in a team, in a meeting situation, if they're taking calls from people, what % of the day do your employees work with others in some capacity? And you might want to do this individually for each person in your team. You might want to actually go and do a survey. So how much are these people responsible for in terms of financial results? What are their KPIs? What are they accountable for? And then finally, how much do they waste due to communication problems? And this can be a tough number to figure out. So this can be time we're sitting in meetings that is ineffective, or that we don't get to an acceptable result. This is definitely rework, not understanding what someone's asking for us. But it can also be emotional reasons that people aren't performing as effectively as they could because they're in a stressed situation with regard to how the team is behaving, or people on their team, or how clients are treating them, and they don't have the skills to mitigate this. Or it can be situations where they just have different communication styles and they're not really listening to each other. And it could be as simple as that. Everyone actually feels really good, but we don't have the skills to effectively listen and understand what one another are saying. And then go back and look at those top 5 skills of what LinkedIn says employers are looking for. How much of their time are they spent on creativity? How much time is there spent on persuasion? How much time is spent on collaboration? How much time is spent just on effective time management? And come up with those numbers. And if you want any help with this, we're happy to do that. That's something that we regularly do with clients, is help them come up with these numbers if they're not sure what to include and what not to include. So if you take number 1, number 2, and number 3 and multiply them by each other, that's the cost of ineffective communication in your department or business unit. And many people are shocked at how high this number is. And it's pretty accurate, because we spend, if we look at people's P&Ls, most companies have their number 1 cost as salaries and wages in some regard. And then the amount of time that teams and people work with one another is also extremely high. So the cost of poor communication, most companies can improve tremendously. Even if they only improve 10%, that's a huge number in terms of the extra work that can get done. So you have to ask yourself, relative to the small amount of time that it actually takes to work on this and do something about it, which is usually only a matter of 6 to 10 hours. It's not much in relation to the outcome and the improvement that's possible. So going back to our example, I have seen this work over and over and over again, especially with teams that have a hard time getting along. And most people react, and they're not aware of how they sound, and they're not aware of how they affect the output and the capability of other people around them. Mindful listening actually begins with listening to yourself. What do you sound like when you talk to other people? And honestly, for some people, this can be a real eye-opener, and it can also be something that can be a little bit painful, but it doesn't have to be. We can take it in the context of, what, this is what I did in the past with the best that I knew then, and now, because I know more, I'm going to do better. Listening to others drops barriers, and then real problem solving can begin, and we can get to the results that we're really looking for and want to have in our businesses. So if you look at communication, what do these companies all have in common? Well, yes, they all do a lot of communication. But they also have something else in common that you might not be aware of. all of them have ongoing training in mindfulness, and the majority of it is because they know how that affects their ability to solve problems quickly, for their teams to work effectively together, and for them to get the results that they are wanting and they're hoping for and they're accounting for. And some of these companies like Google and Apple have had in-house mindfulness ongoing training for 10 years and more. So there's three main components that mindful communication addresses. The first is that we kind of touched on a little bit, is being aware of how you sound when you talk to others, especially your own tendencies. Do you talk too long? Do you avoid issues? Do you only talk to some people and not to others? When we do that, we gain practical skills to be more succinct and more accurate, but still have a human connection. This is not about being a robot. One comment or one, phrase that is said with the right energy and intention and emotion behind it can be incredibly impactful. And I'm sure we can all think of someone who said something to us that may have only taken a minute or less, but it was said with the right intent, and it had impact that we remember it even years later, for positive or for negative. The second area is that develop skills for authentic listening. So before, like the client story I was just sharing with you, before they even think of a response. So this can be hard for people. Honestly, we're trained to do the opposite of this in school. We're trained to have the fastest answer. We're trained to have an answer before we even finish listening to what the question is. So learning to listen mindfully really can change the dynamics of situations, and it's not natural. And we've been trained out of it, so it does require some practice. And then finally, practicing mindfulness in action using the core precepts of mindfulness. And there are 9. And we usually recommend that people take 1 to work on. And then we end up with a situation like our client, where a bad situation plus mindful listening doubles their business in 18 months. So what was the ROI for him? Well, I can tell you that it was $1.5 million in business he gained, and he invested about $5,000 in mindfulness training for his team. So that's way, way high ROI on this. And this is how mindful communication helps. Awareness of yourselves and awareness of others. Once you have that awareness, how do you practice it? How do you make it a day-to-day habit and a technique? Authentic listening. Now, I know that there's a lot of stuff out there where, you make it look like you're listening. That's not what we're talking about. People say if you have the right body language, and while that is true, the brain will listen to the body language. It also knows when you have that feeling, when they're just doing it to have an effect, or if they're actually listening. We teach you how to actually listen and to handle it effectively. And then, of course, the basics of learning the mindfulness precepts and picking the one that's going to help you move forward. Something that's manageable that you can take on, that is going to be like your little personal area of growth, that's going to improve your connection with others and your influence with others and your creativity and your time management as well. So again, these are all companies that have ongoing mindfulness training, and this is why they do it. So I hope you're the next one. Are you the next one that's going to join these world-class companies in doing mindfulness training, and specifically mindfulness communication? If you think that you need to learn more about this, if you want to know what it's actually costing your company by not doing this, or if you're like, yes, this is something we definitely need to look into, there's 2 things you can do. First of all, you can do a free mindful communication, positive communication evaluation with us. We'll take you through a worksheet that will help you assess whether or not there is value in this for you. The other thing you can do is get some free studies from us. We have a couple case studies on companies we've worked with in the past, and the ROIs are really high. I have yet to work with a company on this that hasn't seen an ROI of over 1,000%. There's, which, is not a lot of things you can do to improve that. But when you look at the amount of payroll on most people's P&Ls and the amount of time people spend communicating, it's not hard to come up with some savings that are true savings. They're things that are, moving you towards your ultimate business goals and your KPIs that you're responsible for. So to learn to do this, if you want either one, a free 15-minute cost of communication evaluation, or if you want one of your case studies, email Kira@theeagleinstitute.com.